everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live today, Women Move Mountains. And we have the most amazing guest today, Alison Levine. Alison, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Are you kidding? I'm honored to be here with you. So thank you for having me.
And of course, I always ask people where they're coming from. And for our guests, if you could please drop in the chat where you're coming from. Alison, where are you right now?
I'm in a hotel room in San Antonio because I have a speech in a little bit. No, I mean, we got plenty of time after that. So that's why I look like I'm in a hotel room, because I am in one.
And I too am in a hotel room. I'm I don't know, maybe a little bit more desirable of place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I've got an incredible view that I'm looking out on, but so good to have you for our conversation today. So want to give a little bit of a background to everyone who's on the call. I think a lot of people are already familiar with your incredible story. Obviously, you're known most for your history-making polar explorer and mountaineering. You were the co-captain for the first American women's expedition up Mount Everest. You've climbed the highest peak on every continent. You've skied to both the North and the South Pole. Only 20 people in the world have achieved that. That's the Grand Adventure Slam. You're the first American to complete a 600-mile traverse across the West Antarctic to the South Pole. But you also have taken these kind of extreme adventures and you've applied it to leadership. So you describe this in your book, On the Edge. So leadership writ large. You've worked with the military at West Point. You even are part of Coach K's leadership and ethics center at Duke University, which is actually very close to my heart. I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And of course, you have been, you've also worked in the corporate environment. So you're able to apply all of these lessons to the, challenging work environments. And then specific to our theme today around women, you are not only a role model for women, but you've really taken it a step beyond that, where you're really taking very tangible actions to empower women. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. So just an amazing guest to have. So thank you so much for being our guest today.
Of course. I'm so excited to be here. And I need to just interrupt for 1 second and say, I am so proud of you, because you have been in this corporate wellness space since before it was a thing. You know, I think about when I first met you and you were out there in this space, you know, talking about the importance of it and like dedicating your career to helping people live healthier, happier lives. And when you started doing this, nobody was talking about this. Corporate wellness was such a random thing. And now it's so mainstream. And so I just have to applaud you for like being at the forefront of that before it was really in vogue. So well done, sister.
Thank you. I really appreciate the love. So the first mountain that you climbed, Kilimanjaro, 1998, and then 4 years later, you led the expedition up, this women's team, American women's team up Everest. And one of the people who, of course, is associated with Mount Everest is Mallory. And when he was asked, you know, why did he want to climb Everest? His answer was, because it's there. So what was your why, first in climbing Kilimanjaro, but then going on to climb Everest, not only once, but twice, and and also ascending the highest peaks across every continent? So what was your why, and what is your why around that?
So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. And when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the stories of the early Arctic and the Antarctic explorers and the early mountaineers, because I loved these stories about really cold places, because it felt like an escape from the extremely oppressive summer heat in Phoenix. So I would read the books and watch the documentary films, but I never thought I would go to those places because I had some health challenges. I was born with a hole in my heart that got bigger as I got older. And I had my first heart surgery when I was 17. That one did not go so well, but I had another one when I turned 30. And at that point, this light bulb kind of went on in my head. And I thought, wait, if I want to know what it's like to be, you know, Reinhold Messner and drag a 150-pound sled across Antarctica to the South Pole, then I should go do it instead of just reading about it. If I want to know what it's like to be George Mallory, Sir Edmund Hillary, Tenzing Norgay, if I want to know what it's like to be these guys climbing these big mountains, then I should go to the mountains instead of watching documentaries about them. If these other guys can do this stuff, why can't I do it too? So I climbed my first mountain when I was in 1998. I was 32 years old, and I'm about to turn 59 next month and still going.
I love it. Yeah, I love the way your adventures don't stop. I feel like so many people who translate adventure into speaking on the stage, it's kind of a one-trick pony. And furthermore, it's a one-trick pony and it's about them. And we're going to be talking about how you've really translated this to be about other people. And in fact, I have to say, the little bit of climbing that I have done, you are the voice in my head. You're like the encouragement. And one of the stories that I love so much that you share is this idea that somehow if we don't summit, that it doesn't count.
Right.
And that this is one of your key messages. And in fact, you tell this fabulous story of how somebody in the audience once said, well, well, wait, you didn't summit? You didn't, your first expedition of Everest, you didn't quite make it to the top. So somehow that doesn't count. And so then you countered with saying, well, what do you do? And are you the CEO? And he was like, no. And then you're like, well, it doesn't count then, right? So talk a little bit about this idea about, really, climb every mountain, summit it if you can, but maybe not.
Right.
And everything counts. Every part of the journey counts.
Yes, every part of the journey definitely counts. And it's really what you learn along the way that's most valuable. Because if you break this down, Mount Everest is just a pile of rock and ice. That's what Mount Everest is, a pile of rock and ice. And standing on top of a pile of rock and ice doesn't really change you or change the world. Standing up there, at least it didn't feel like that for me. It was more the lessons that you learn along the way when you're fighting like hell to get up there. And then what you're going to do with that information to be better going forward. And an interesting statistic is that most of the deaths that occur on Mount Everest occur after people have reached the summit, when they're on their way down, because they use everything they've got in them to get themselves to the top, and they don't have enough left in the tank, enough energy reserves to get themselves down. And so the summit can never be the goal. The summit of Mount Everest is the halfway point. You have to get yourself all the way back down. So number one goal of climbing any mountain, come back alive. Number two, come back with all your fingers and toes. Number three, come back as, with new friends that you've met on the mountain. There's a lot of other goals that should come before the summit. And when I served as the team captain for the first American Women's Everest expedition in 2002, we actually didn't make it. We were 270 feet from the top and had to turn back in bad weather. And it took me 8 years to get up the guts to go again. But when I went back in 2010 and did make it to the summit, it was all those lessons I learned in 2002 that helped me get there. Because in 2010, we had similar bad weather to what we had in 2002. But because I had been high up on that summit ridge in a storm, I wasn't afraid of it the second time around. Right. So I knew what it felt like to get the living snot kicked out of me high up on that summit ridge. And I was like, I've been here before. I felt this before. And I can keep going.
So you take these stories and you help the largely leaders that you're speaking to on these stages across the country, around the world, and you help them to translate this toward leadership writ large. So what are some of those key, like, how do you translate just that piece toward leading a team in, say, I don't know, a manufacturing company or in a, or how do you help the leaders to translate that to their work environment? Just that lesson right there.
So it's interesting. I feel like, I've learned so many great lessons in the mountains, also from my time on the part-time faculty at West Point, and I was formerly on the board of the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics. And so many of the great lessons I learned in the mountains, I also learned from like my fellow faculty members at West Point and my fellow former board members at the Coach K Center. And so I feel like I just can wrap all those things up from working with so many different types of people and learning lessons from them. It helps me share them with different audiences. And I think that these audiences, like these lessons are very universal because, something that helps, you might be in manufacturing or finance or pharmaceuticals or tech or healthcare, whatever you're in, we all face challenges about wanting to achieve big things in times of uncertainty, regardless of what industry you work in. There's so much uncertainty in the world. And the lessons I've learned really are pretty universal. And one of the big ones is that you don't have to know what's coming at you down the trail. You don't have to have perfect visibility as to what's coming at you down the trail in order to keep moving toward an important goal. If you have clarity in your intent, you do not need absolute clarity in the environment. Whatever industry you're in, if you wait for absolute clarity in your environment before you move toward your goal, you might be waiting around forever. And you don't need absolute clarity in order to just put one foot in front of the other. You don't. You can put one foot in front of the other even when the clouds have closed in and visibility is absolute shit. You can always put one foot in front of the other.
So a journey of 1,000 miles begins with that first step. You're not ever going to be able to see 1,000 miles in front of you, and you have no idea what's going to happen along the way. But what you do have clarity around, or what you have the capacity to have clarity around, is your intent going into it.
Yes.
So we have a question here from Sarah Kiley. Alison, you've conquered some of the most extreme environments on Earth, where turning back can be just as strategic as pushing forward. In the corporate world, leaders often feel pressure to, quote, summit at all costs. What's your most unexpected lesson from the mountains that business leaders, and especially women, and Sarah, thank you for really tying this to our theme today of Women Move Mountains, should embrace when faced with these tough decisions?
Something to remember when you're faced with these tough decisions is to acknowledge the difficulty with everybody on your team. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about by that. What leaders really need to do is this goes back to that, the lessons we've all learned about vulnerability. So I'm climbing this mountain in Russia called Mount Elbrus. And this is in 1998, fall of 1998. And our head guide was an amazing guide named Vern Tejas, incredibly accomplished mountaineer. I am the only woman on this mountaineering team. And I am so much smaller than everyone else. I've got teammates that are 6'4", 220 pounds, a foot taller than me, twice my weight. We're all carrying heavy packs. Carrying a 30 or 40 pound pack on someone that's my size is much more challenging than someone who weighs 200 pounds trying to, carrying a 40 pound pack. I am struggling. My quads are screaming. I have a banging altitude headache, and I start thinking, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe this isn't the sport for me. Maybe I don't belong on this team. Maybe this just isn't for me. And that's what's going through my head with every step. So we stop for a break, and Vern Tejas says to everyone, "How's everybody doing?" Everybody chimes in. "Doing awesome. Let's go. Let's keep rocking. Don't slow down. Yeah, we've got this." And everyone's talking about how awesome they're doing. And I am completely struggling. So everyone's like, "Yeah, feeling good, feeling good, feeling good." And then Vern said, "Okay, guess I'm the only one with an altitude headache and whose quads are screaming." And I bet he didn't have an altitude headache. I bet his quads actually were not screaming because he is so fit and so capable and lives in the mountains. But the fact that he said that made me feel like I'm normal. It's normal to feel uncomfortable and maybe even feel some pain when you're doing really freaking hard things. It's not gonna be comfortable. It's normal to feel pain. But when he said that he was feeling uncomfortable and feeling pain, it made me feel like, okay, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm feeling normal. It's not just me that's struggling. And once he basically acknowledged, you guys, this is really hard stuff that we're doing. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to be out of your comfort zone, and you might even be in pain, but it doesn't mean you can't keep going. But once he said that he was struggling, it made me feel like I belong here. I can do this. And it's okay that it's painful. Just because it's painful doesn't mean that I can't do it.
I love that he did that. And what he did, it sounds like, is that he created psychological safety for you, but also for everyone else there, because I'm sure that while you were feeling that discomfort, I'm sure others were as well, and they probably just didn't feel like that they could share that,
Right.
especially
Everybody has to be rah. They call it toxic positivity. Oh, this is so great. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm really, really having a hard time right now.
Yeah. So let's talk now. I mean, first of all, just the fact that you are the only woman on this all-male team, that in and of itself is inspiring to other women. But I think that that's where a lot of women adventurers who kind of translate that to, if I can do it, you can do it kind of thing. That's great. But you've taken it a bit beyond that. And so I would love it if you could talk a little bit first about how you've elevated the story of Pasang.
Oh, that's so
yeah.
nice to ask about her. So somebody
Yeah.
who was just a hero to me, who I never met her personally because she passed away in 1993. But there was a woman named Pasang Lamu Sherpa, who was the first female Sherpa to summit Mount Everest. And so, by the way, Sherpa is an ethnic minority group in Nepal. A lot of people think that Sherpa is a job of carrying things up a mountain. And most of the people that work on Mount Everest, for example, are of Sherpa descent. But there's other people that work on the mountains. They're called porters. So Sherpa is actually an ethnic minority group in Nepal. And this woman, Pasang Lamu Sherpa, saw all the men in her village climbing Mount Everest, her brothers, her uncles, all the men were climbing, and she wanted to climb too. But the government of Nepal would not let female Sherpas climb. They would only let the men climb. And the women were supposed to stay home and cook and clean and take care of the family. And her argument was, wait a minute, you let all these foreign women from all these other countries come here and climb this mountain in my backyard, yet I'm not allowed to because I'm of Sherpa descent. So she basically took on this fight for all women in Nepal, not just Sherpa women, but all Nepali women. And she was finally granted access to the mountain. She tried 3 times unsuccessfully to reach the summit. Finally summited on her 4th attempt, but she died on the way down.
Oh.
She never got to tell her story. And it's such an amazing story about determination and willpower and fighting for equality. And Pasang took on this fight for all women in Nepal. And she was, a mother of 3 children. She left 3 children behind when she passed away, but she's super famous in Nepal. Every kid in school learns about her. She's like the Rosa Parks of Nepal. So everyone in Nepal knows who she is, but people outside of Nepal did not know her story. And so I was the executive producer of a film called Pasang in the Shadow of Everest, directed by Nancy Svensson, who's from Marin County. And we just wanted to get her story out there because I think it can inspire, her story will inspire a lot of people.
Such an amazing story. And so you've served as a role model. You've elevated the story of someone who is a role model for other women, moving that beyond Nepal to around the world with this film. But then you've also directly trained other women, specifically in Uganda, to become these guides, and in doing so, to really accelerate their not only their confidence, but really to make a difference for them economically and where they're positioned in and how they're perceived within the society that they're living within. So can you share about that?
Yeah. So it's funny when people ask me about, my favorite expedition or my favorite mountain experience. I always talk about this story about this mountain in Western Uganda, the Ruwenzori Mountains, and Mount Stanley is the highest peak in Uganda. It's a little over 16,000 feet. And I went over there for the first time to climb in 2005. And the mountain had been shut down for a long time because there's a lot of conflict between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And these mountains border those two countries. And so the mountain opened up finally when the conflict temporarily died down. And I went over there to climb. And what I noticed was there were no women working in the mountains. It was all men. And I saw women working out in the fields, farming the land and carrying big jugs of water and food and supplies on their heads. And they looked so strong. So when I went to get our climbing permit, I said, hey, can we get women, guides and porters to go with us? And because you have to take local guides and porters with you. It's the park regulation. So I said, can we get the women to come with us? And they said, there are no women guides and porters in the Ruwenzori Mountains. Like, it is taboo in our culture. Women are not allowed to go to the mountains. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And because women weren't allowed in the mountains, they had no way to earn money because working in the mountains was the only way to earn money in this area at the time.
Wow.
So we called a meeting with the head of the local village, the head of the park service, the head of the guiding service, and talked them into allowing us to take the first local women. The Bakanjo tribe are the locals that live there. The first local women up Uganda's highest mountain. And the first local woman to summit was with us. Her name was Malabina. And then after that, women were subsequently able to get jobs working as porters and guides and high altitude cooks. And they were able for the first time in their lives to earn a sustainable living wage. So that's why this expedition is so near and dear to my heart, because it's a way that I could use the love of my sport to actually have impact and have positive influence on a community.
And in such an unusual way. I mean, there's so many kind of women's empowerment programs around the world. And I have to say, I mean, this is really one of a kind, but what a difference that it has made. And so again, moving beyond the confidence building to really have more economic power. Go ahead.
And the tough thing about that region was that prior to working in the mountains, the only way women could earn money was through prostitution. And they would say to me, oh, we love war. And I thought, oh, there must be a language barrier here. You didn't mean we love war. And they said, no, we love war, because when there's war, there's soldiers. And when there's soldiers, we can make money through prostitution. So that was just, I mean, it felt like so gut wrenching to hear them say this, because most of these women are moms, they have multiple children. They have to find a way to feed their kids. There's no husband around. And so they just turned to prostitution. And the average life expectancy at the time when I was there was only 42. People were dying of AIDS and malaria. And it was just a tough situation in this part of the world.
That is amazing. And I have to share, I've lived in Africa for almost 3 years, and it's just amazing to see in some countries where they are starting to make some progress around that, but how you've been the one to really facilitate that in Uganda. So let's talk a little bit about kind of applying this Women Move Mountains in the workplace. And there's so much conversation about women's empowerment, and there's this debate between leaning in, really kind of change coming from within the woman, versus the workplace itself needing to change in order to enable women to be able to have more power within the workplace, to be promoted more often, or to be paid what they're worth. So what are your thoughts around that balance between the two? Where do you fall in on that equation?
I think it has to be, the responsibility has to fall on both parts. The companies need to be very aware and very proactive, but on the flip side, women also need to be very proactive and need to advocate for themselves and cannot assume that someone else is always going to be looking out for them. You have to look out for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself. And one important rule is if you don't ask, you won't get. You have to ask for the things that you want. The worst thing that can happen is somebody might say no. And you remember that no often means not right now, or, don't be afraid when someone says no, when we get rejected in some way, whether it's asking for a raise or a promotion or something we want, whatever that is, when we hear no, a lot of times we just go, okay, sorry I asked, and we back off. It's so important to ask why. Don't just back away when somebody says no. You say, okay, can I, I'd like to ask why. Because sometimes they're like, oh, well, because we're not giving raises until next June. There could be a reason why you got to know that has nothing to do with you. And there's a book called Rejection Proof that my friend Jia Zhang wrote, and it's all about how to overcome rejection. And part of this, we tend to fear rejection so much. And I understand that fear, and I understand that fear is very real. But what you have to remember, and please, I want everyone watching this to embrace this mindset. You can be scared and brave at the same time. That's what you have to remember, whether you're climbing a mountain or you're going for a promotion or asking for a raise or asking for something that you want or making a big change or taking on some challenge that scares you. You can be scared and brave at the same time. Hard stop. You can.
I love that. I mean, personally, I'm scared all the time. Right?
And it doesn't help. It doesn't help when someone goes, "Don't be scared." Then you're like, "Oh, okay, I'm good. I'm all good now. Thanks for that."
Right. It's like, okay, I'm scared, but I'm going to be brave anyway. I love that. And it's also kind of this idea of every rejection equals an opportunity to redirect. How can I redirect this? And I think a lot about Elizabeth Banks, amazing actor. She talks about this idea. I raise my hand a lot. And I think so many women aren't even raising their hand in the first place. And then, God forbid, if they do raise their hand, then they get rejected and they're like, oh, okay, I'm out. As opposed to, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, when I first got the phone call asking me if I wanted to serve as the team captain for the first American Women's Everest expedition, initially I said no, because I thought, even though I had climbed the highest peak on 6 continents and had done a lot of other climbing in between, a ton of other climbing, I thought, I'm not going to be good enough. I'm not going to be fast enough. I'm not going to be strong enough. Felt like way more challenge than I was ready to take on at the time. But then I thought, well, there's only going to be one first American Women's Everest expedition. And if I don't step up to the plate to be the team captain, somebody else is going to do it. Someone else is going to be living my dream adventure. So I think there are times in your life where you just have to step up, even if you feel like you aren't ready. Step up.
So top 3 takeaways in 30 seconds or less.
Well, I would go with, you can be scared and brave at the same time.
Love that.
If you have clarity in your intent, you do not need clarity in the environment. And the last one I will say is that backing up is not the same as backing down. Oftentimes you have to change direction. You have to feel like you're maybe going in a direction that you didn't anticipate going. You feel like you're moving backward in your career. This is an opportunity to gain strength. So you're better out of the gates the next time around. So backing up is not the same as backing down. Those are my 3.
I love it. So even when you're scared, be brave anyway. And backing up is not backing down. And be clear in your intent, even if you have no clarity in terms of where you're going and what lies ahead.
Exactly.
Alison Levine, you are amazing. You have not only ascended mountains, serving as a role model for women, for men, for children, for everyone. But you have also really provided a pathway for everyone to be able to move mountains, especially for women to move mountains. And as a woman, I am so grateful. Thank you so much for being our guest today. And for all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today about how women can move mountains.